I'm obviously not Councillor Binney. I am Brian Perry, the clerk to the meeting. Councillor Binney has sent her apologies as she's not feeling too well today. So before we move into apologies and other business, can I ask if any member of the committee wishes to take the chair for today's meeting, either to volunteer or to be nominated?
I'm happy to do so if the committee is happy for me to do so.
So just to be clear, Councillor Hannah's volunteered. Are committee members present happy for that? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sinclair, see your hand up, and then see Councillor Spears has got his light on. Councillor Sinclair.
Thanks, Brian. It was just to say that I would have been happy to nominate Councillor Hannah, but since she's magnanimously volunteered, I'm content with that.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, Councillor Spears, I see your lights on. I see your lights on, Councillor Spears.
I'm aware of that, but your sound's particularly pathetic, more worse than it is normally. Can you give us an update before we start the meeting if there is a timeline for improvements on the sound?
Councillor Spears is referring to the sound in the room, which hasn't been too great at recent meetings. There is an update where we're looking into it. The sound has been worked on for a matter of months. They were getting a quote for a new system, which once we've got that in place, hopefully we can get a new system. But for now, there's no immediate timelines.
So we don't have a timeline?
No. We're getting a quote from the council's audiovisual company, and once we've got that, we'll act on it. No other hands on, no other nominations, so I'll ask Councillor Hannah to take the chair.
Thank you. I'll try and speak as clearly as I can so that I'm audible, and if anybody has difficulty hearing me, let me know. Good. I'm glad to hear that. This is a meeting of the Falkirk Council Pensions Committee and Pensions Board. It is a hybrid meeting, so a number of our members are online, and this is being streamed for the public. We do have a deputation this morning, and we will arrange for a suitable time for that to be discussed. But first of all, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Binney, as I said earlier, Councillor Aitchison, and also Sandy Harrower, who's a member of the board.
Any other apologies? I should have said, for those people in the room, if you do want to speak, you put your light on, but don't leave it on if someone else is speaking. Our officers will take a note who wants to speak and will come to you. For those online, if you could use the hand icon and put that up, then we will try and ensure that we see everything. And if we don't see your hand on the screen, then please jump up and down or wave or do something to attract our attention. So, Councillor Spears, you wanted to say something?
You've mentioned a deputation. Can you tell me which agenda item they wish to speak out?
We have a deputation for agenda item 7. No, sorry, 9, agenda item 9. And with the agreement of the committee, I would suggest that we have that deputation after we've dealt with the minutes, and that we then deal with that agenda item early on as well. But we'll come to that once we get to that item, okay? Next issue is any declarations of interest. Yes?
I don't think it affects this, but on the teachers' pension scheme, I'm on the scheme advisory board. So I don't think it impacts because it's a different scheme, but it's just for complete transparency.
Brian?
I think you're right. I don't think it's entirely relevant, but we'll look into it and we can record it as what's called a transparency statement. So you're saying you have that interest, but you think it doesn't impact on this, so you're willing to take part. You think you can take part in the meeting. So
yes, I don't think it affects any part of the meeting. I was just wanting to be completely transparent.
Sure. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. No other declarations of interest. Okay, we'll move on to the minutes of the last meeting. Agenda item 3. Does anyone have anything to raise on the minutes of the last meeting? I see a hand. I can't actually read.
Albert.
Is that Ross?
Thank you, Councillor. Could I just record my apologies for that meeting? Thank you.
Can we have that added to the minute, please?
Thank you.
Any other issues with the minute? Albert?
Thanks, Councillor. It's just a comment on point PE30, the investment review. So the minutes there notes that there was a question around table 2 in the investment review report. It's not shown in the minutes there, but in that table, the position of sovereign bonds as at the end of December 2023 was shown in the table as 0.3%. And that looked slightly awry, given that the numbers in previous and following quarters were in the region of 10 to 12%. I was just coming back to the committee to confirm that it looks like that was a formatting error in terms of the conversion of the table. The actual number for sovereign bonds at end December 23 was 10.3. So it looks like the 1 was unfortunately omitted in the formatting of that table.
Thank you for that. Can we have the minute amended to record that?
I don't think it's needing change. I think what Mr. Chen was saying was that there was a question about that at the last meeting and
Right.
he undertook to come back, and this is him coming back to explain. So the minute's correct, but that's your explanation just been given there.
Okay, thank you. That will be added to today's minute then. Can we agree the minute then? Minute agreed. Okay, I'd like to ask Brian now to explain who we have as a deputation and what the situation is here this morning.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you said at the start, we do have a deputation request from Niamh Bainbridge, who's asked to come and speak to the committee and board in relation to item 9. In terms of deputation requests, the request has been made, but it's up to the committee whether they wish to hear the deputation. So that's the first stage. If you're happy to hear from the deputation, then she'll be invited to come up to the table and speak. She's entitled to speak to up to 10 minutes. And after that, there can be questions. So the first part of the process really is, are you happy to hear the deputation?
Are we happy to hear Councillor Spears?
Thank you. Who exactly is the deputation, and do they work for the local authority, and you know, they're just council taxpayers or local residents? Or
as far as I understand, Ms. Bainbridge is just a local. She's a member of the public who just has an interest in this item and wishes to let the committee and board know what her views are. She doesn't work for a local authority, as far as I understand. Just a member of the public. Doesn't represent a body or anything like that.
that's the general public at large, not Falkirk District.
I don't have that information.
Do you have an objection to hearing the deputation, or should we perhaps invite Niamh Bainbridge to come and you could ask the question as to what her interest is before she starts. Would that be acceptable? Otherwise, does everyone agree that we'll hear the deputation? I see no objections to that. So I would suggest that if Niamh could come up to there's a space here at the side where you could have a seat oh.
Good morning, first of
Just
all.
for your information, as long as the light's red, we can hear you. If you could speak clearly, because our sound system is far from perfect. And if you could begin by just explaining what your interest is in this particular item, and we won't count that as part of your 10 minutes.
That's absolutely fine. Again, my name's Niamh Bainbridge. I'm a local. I live in Maddiston. Local taxpayer. I'm not sure what other information you asked for. Just a member.
Sorry, the name of the group and
There's no group.
the
It's just
aims and
me.
objectives of what you're going to really speak about.
Yeah, I can do that just now.
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you. So I do understand that this meeting isn't likely to come to any decisions on current investments today, and that there will likely be another report on this topic, but I wanted to come forward with my concerns over your current investments. So after reading over the review of the investment principles, I did notice that there are holdings with 4 arms manufacturers coming to a total value of £31,433,687, which, as you know, is only 0.88% of the fund, but it does make all the difference to the victims of the arms manufacturers. I believe that we can lower the percentage down to 0 and can build up our local community in the process, especially because the proportion to the rest of the fund is so small. I sent over a very short report I made in the week or so running up to this meeting, which, although very basic, it does show that it's an achievable goal. I've also got facts and figures, but this can understandably get quite confusing and hard to follow. I don't want to impose that today at all. And you've also made them available online. As of yesterday, though, Israel has ended their ceasefire and resumed full-scale attacks on Gaza and the West Bank, and this couldn't happen without weaponry which we are funding the creation of. The death toll from yesterday is already above 300. A couple of alternative investments I'd like to put forward for consideration are within Scotland's renewable sector, which I know will already be a point of discussion, but it's still worth mentioning, because it does contain a few options within this, like solar, wind, hydroelectricity. You can also consider carbon capture and storage and other things like this. I don't personally believe it's a viable option. I'm happy to go further into that at a later date. Another option would be to invest in Falkirk Football Club, which is a bit of a left turn, I understand, but it's a local club. It's been doing quite well in Scottish football, and with their new CEO, Jamie Swinney, who's quite interested in business opportunities, it's definitely something to consider investing in. It's also worth mentioning that the community helps the club through the Falkirk Supporters Society. So the fans sign up, send the club money monthly, help with the club development on top of the tickets, merch, food and drink. They're very loyal to the club, and they strongly believe that when they invest in Falkirk Football Club, the club will invest back into the community. So it's an option. I do understand these are very simple examples, and I don't have much data at today's meeting, unfortunately. But I'm happy to do further research for the committee and send over my findings. As a local, I'm very invested in the betterment of my community. And as a graduate with a degree in business management, I want to offer my skills where possible. As a resident of the Forth Valley community, I also want to be comfortable knowing that our council pension fund is not supporting genocide, displacement and war crimes alongside the climate crisis. Thank you for taking the time to hear from me today.
Thank you very much, Niamh. Does anyone, we now can open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions for Niamh? Okay, Tom.
So just to be clear, you're not a contributor to the pension fund or a likely beneficiary?
Not currently, no.
No.
It's something I'd certainly be interested in.
Well, as a potential employee? But what we're concerned with here are the benefits of the members. So I don't understand your logic in influencing the fortunes of members, either currently or in receipt of payments.
I can understand that. I'm looking at it more from the perspective of a member of the community. So I live locally. You represent me. And the money that I pay towards my taxes, etc., some of that money is being spent on this pension fund, which does have investments in arms manufacturing. That's where my concern's coming from.
For the last 2 years, I've hosted a girl from Ukraine. As you know, Ukraine is struggling in a conflict with Russia. Obviously, that country is relying on arms partly from the West to sustain its independence. If your policy of disinvestment is followed, that would penalise Ukraine. How would you respond to that?
I disagree that it would penalise Ukraine. I guess another way that you could come at that argument is that we invest in Russia's oil. I know that that will be a point of discussion, but it's just another way to look at it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Spears.
I don't know whether to declare an interest or not, but I was a former captain in the Royal Engineers who served 2 tours in Iraq. We mainly spent our time in that poor, downtrodden country where there was real poverty on restructuring. Are you saying that you shouldn't invest in mass security when I was there restructuring the country?
I have family who have served in the military. I completely understand where you're coming from. Divesting from future investments is not the same as ensuring security. I would also posit that you were rebuilding because of bombs that destroyed the area. So it's not really, I understand what you're saying, but future divestments will not affect past and current.
How will we be able to make the equipment that's needed for the security of our troops if pension funds are not investing in them? I understand the government has increased the percentage of GDP to the defence of our country because it will be, everybody in the room will be aware of the present situation that we're in. And you're asking us to almost withdraw from that, and that is very, very concerning.
I am asking you to consider coming away from these investments. I'm not asking you to drop them straight away, 100% all at the same time. This is absolutely a slow process, as it tends to be in bureaucracy. But even without that, I'm not saying that we should have zero security. I'm saying that these investments are irresponsible and unethical.
Sorry, can I interrupt just a second, Councillor Spears? This is about our investment strategy, which Niamh
Well,
has
I'm
clearly
reading all
brought
of
it
that.
back to. And I think it's important we don't get into a broader debate about world politics or wars across the world. It is about our investment policy.
Well,
So,
it depends on
go
the
ahead.
safety of our troops affects us all, and world politics affects us, and I believe that's a platform that the lady's standing on today. How would you secure or safeguard the security of troops that are there in peacekeeping?
Sorry, Councillor Spears, I have said we're not here for a debate on world politics. I think we'll go to Councillor Sinclair now.
Thank you, convener. And in an attempt to kind of bring it back to what the purpose of the deputation was, I wonder if, and thanks to Niamh for that deputation, I think you've made some pretty fair points throughout what you said, and also in answer to some of the questions. Would it be fair to suggest that the purpose of bringing this here today is to allow the committee to consider current investments and the opportunities that we would have to invest in other fields that perhaps don't have the negative connotations attached to them?
That is exactly what I'm trying to bring forward. I understand there are security issues. I don't think that is a discussion that needs to be had currently. I do think that the responsible investments is something that we should at least discuss, consider, and look to form a report on for future meetings. Please. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And with your indulgence, convener. You've mentioned several alternatives within your deputation. Would it also be fair to suggest that the understanding of yourself, perhaps, on the committee's fiduciary duty in the protection of members of the pension fund is what we are primarily here to consider, and that includes the entirety of our investment portfolio, which, as you suggest, the matter in which you speak of is represents a very, very small proportion of that investment portfolio.
Yes, as I did mention, it's only 0.88% of the fund. So I definitely believe that if we look for alternative investments, we will find them. It might not be the easiest thing to do, but I'm certainly, as a member of the community, but as someone with a degree in business management, I would be delighted to give my services where possible. I know that, again, that is just one random person, but I do represent a lot of people who feel similarly, who want to give their skills to the pension committee, to Falkirk Council where we can, and sometimes this is the way.
Thank you, and I think. Thank you very much for your deputation. I don't have any further questions, but perhaps more questions to officers as we come into the debate. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sinclair. Does anyone else have any questions? Can I just ask, sorry?
I just have one further point. The investing world is moving away from using direct equities to using index funds. Index funds just buy everything that's listed in that particular index, whether it's the UK, the US, or whatever. So if the investment fund moved to 100% to that policy, we would have the option only of investing in all the index or taking or not investing in the index at all, which would reduce our exposure to equities, which give the best long-term return. So the move to index investing reduces that flexibility of individual discretion on individual stocks. So your policy would be quite brutal in terms of forcing us out of equity investing for long term.
Sorry, have you got a question? This is for questions,
the question is,
not for grandstanding.
Do you understand the implications of index investing for your proposal?
I do understand the implications, thank you. I think that is something for the committee to consider.
Thank you. Can I just ask one final question? And that is, how would you explain to our pensioners, because we have a fiduciary duty to ensure that our beneficiaries get the best possible return. So how would you explain to them if we were unable, if we did agree to divest from ARMS and we were unable to invest in something as sound? How would you explain to pensioners that their pension was less?
I would say that there's always a risk with investments. That's part of investing. I would hope that there would be enough in the pension fund to look after our current pensioners, and I'm not asking anyone to make any decisions on divesting before they are comfortable and sure of future investments, that it's something they want to partake in.
Right, thank you very much. We really appreciate the contribution you've made, and it will assist us, obviously, in making our decision on the report that is before us, which is not about whether we divest or not, but about whether we ask for a report on the pros and cons of different approaches. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Now, at that point, have you resolved the buzzing noise that we were hearing? Sorry about that, Niamh. Sorry if that disturbed you at all. At that point, then, we will go on to the item that we've just heard the deputation on. I should have said the people who are in the involved with the deputation are welcome to stay for this and any other items until we come on to our private part of the meeting. You're welcome to remain and listen to the discussions that are going on here. So we'll go on to agenda item 9 now, the review of investment principles. And can I ask you, Amanda, to just lead us through that?
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. So the report in front of you today addresses questions that members of the committee and the board have been asking around getting a better understanding of responsible investment and what that means for the fund, and including what options are open to the fund. The fund has received a deputation from Clackmannanshire Council requesting divestment from fossil fuels last year, and today we've had our deputation requesting divestment from the arms industry. So in advance of considering the report today, committee and board members attended training in January of this year, which was delivered by the Head of Responsible Investment for Lothian Pension Fund and also representatives from Hermes EOS, our engagement specialists. And the report in front of members today provides more information on the decision-making framework in place for the fund, with the key individual elements of the framework listed at paragraph 4.2. Fundamentally, this is a complicated area, and there's a number of considerations which have to be taken account of by the fund. And so the report today doesn't make recommendations on a specific approach to different investments or sectors, but instead the report recommends that the fund seeks external expert advice for this area. And this recommendation is made for a number of reasons. Firstly, as I've said, the complexity of the issues under consideration and the wide variety of factors that the fund must take into account, not least fiduciary duty, which, as noted at paragraph 4.3.5, underpins all of our decision making. We've recognised that the committee and the board has to understand the full impact of any new policies or decisions and how these could be implemented. And also, we have recognised the need for a principles-based approach to be approved so that we can pass that approach to our fund managers and have them adhere to it. There's acceptance that, as noted in the Statement of Responsible Investment Principles, the management of environmental, social and governance issues is a question of identifying and mitigating material financial risks. It is not a question of ethics. Paragraph 4.5.3 highlights that the introduction of ethics into decision-making activities is challenging because of the diverging views on what is ethical and what is not. And pension funds have faced these challenges for many years, with people challenging the ownership of a wide variety of equities, and that's including things like tobacco, alcohol, oil, fast fashion, luxury fashion, mining, technology, including social media, banks and financial institutions, and, as we've heard today, arms manufacturers. And each time those people have very compelling arguments to support divestment in those areas. But fundamentally, the fund needs to generate sufficient financial returns to be able to pay pensions. And that's why the fund has today had a principles-based approach, so that a clear and understandable framework is in place that recognises divestment in the context of the requirement to have the returns to be able to pay the pensions. And paragraph 4.6.8 of the report highlights that the Scheme Advisory Board guidance suggests a decision to divest should be made on a case-by-case basis, rather than in one particular sector or geographical location. And furthermore, the fund must be assured that the financial returns would not be harmed, and professional advice is taken to consider wider financial consequences. So, recognising all of that and the fact that the committee and board want to understand what further steps the fund can take, particularly in respect of conflict-affected and high-risk areas, the report recommends that the fund obtains specialist advice. This would ensure that any future changes to the current framework and any decisions taken by the committee and the board in this area are made with a clear understanding of the implications. And that approach, I believe, would be the best way to protect the fund, but also to address the committee and the board's concerns in this area. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Anyone have any questions? And sorry, Councillor Spears, are you able to hear? No. Do you think you could move up a wee bit, because I think the sound is a bit better further up. You can bring your name plate with you if you want, or maybe Carly could help you. It's just I do think that the sound is better up this end of the thing because of the way the speakers are. Thank you. Okay, does anyone have any questions for Amanda? Or who's that? Councillor Quinn, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question about point 4.6.8 on page 8. It mentions about to reduce the risk of legal challenges from divestment. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What kind of legal challenges might we encounter if we divested, and how likely is that to happen? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. To start, likelihood, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's partly what we need to get that specialist advice to advise us on. We have seen, and we reference in the report, that there has been some discussion about, for example, paragraph 4.7.2, the Economic Activities of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill that had been going through Parliament. We know that that's now been stopped, but we know that this is an area that a lot of pension funds are wrestling with, and we know that there is the potential for legal challenges. Again, I don't know how likely that is, but again, I would hope that our specialist advisors would be able to feedback on that in their report to committee.
Thank you, Amanda. Does that satisfy your question? Apparently, yes.
Yeah, I have another follow-up question, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, is there any other similar pension funds to ours, any other councils around the UK that have maybe already taken the approach to divest from certain things that we could learn from, or is that something else that we hope to kind of learn from when we look into this? Thanks.
Amanda?
I think part of the exercise would be looking at different approaches to divestment. I do believe that there's one or two funds in England and Wales that have potentially taken decisions along these lines. And so I think there is some learning from the approaches that other funds have taken. But I guess my concern is that we understand the implications of that. So what do we put in place? How do our fund managers manage that? What are the potential financial implications if we are going with more bespoke fund mandates, which exclude certain things? Does that increase our investment fees? All of those kind of wider things to consider. So I think there is definitely learning from what other funds have done and how it's impacted on them.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Okay, thank you. Rob?
Yes, I think, as I referred to earlier, I think a very simple way out of this is to move the fund 100% to index investing, passive investing, where the components of the index are determined by the index committees rather than by stock selection by the fund manager. So what that means is if you buy into the US equities, you buy all the US equities in the index. In the UK, you buy all the UK stocks. So the decision on whether we invest in particular stocks or not is taken out of our hands. It reduces the decision-making process. It's devolved to the index compilers, and it just simplifies life and reduces costs.
If you want to answer that, and maybe kind of, you could maybe also comment on whether that will be covered in the report that is going to be brought forward or not.
I think there's maybe just a couple of things that I would say in response to that, and I don't know if Emmanuel, I can see Emmanuel from Lothian, he may want to come in as well. I suppose what we've tried to set out in the paper is that as officers and as pension fund, we are not making currently individual decisions on stock selection. That is done by our fund managers. We select the mandates that we want those fund managers to run. We do that based on having an appropriate sort of diversification across the whole fund so that we're managing risk effectively. But just for the avoidance of doubt, stock selection, I don't select stocks. The fund doesn't, the committee and the board don't select stocks. It's done by the fund managers based on the parameters which are set out in the mandate that we've signed up to, and also in what's in our Statement of Responsible Investment Principles and our Statement of Investment Principles. The other thing I would say is that we have an approach of engagement rather than divestment, albeit divestment is the last stage of an engagement process. And my understanding of that more passive investment is that you lose that sort of engagement voice that we have currently, where we're voting actively with the stocks that we hold. If we hold stocks passively, then we don't have that lobbying voice to try and affect change within the companies that we invest in. So those are the dangers of it.
And can I ask, would that be covered in the report that's coming forward?
I think we probably need to sit down and go through our procurement process and scope out what exactly we need that to do. It's not something that was really sitting on my radar, if I'm being honest, because as I say, what it does is it really dilutes our engagement voice, which I think committee to this point have been quite clear that it is an important part of what we do. As I say, I don't know if Emmanuel might want to add anything to us.
Would you like to add to that, Emmanuel?
Good morning. Yes, thank you. I think the points have been made. The passive investment means there are no decisions either on which stocks to hold, in what weight, or whether there's any engagement possible. So these points have been covered. We at Lothian do not favor passive investing for those reasons, and very happy, I think, to work with Amanda to find out whether the external advice can also cover this point.
Thank you very much. Sorry, you want to come back? Yes.
Yes, I understand those points, but I think at the briefing we had, I think Hermes made the point that acting on the behalf of the index investors, they do representations to the companies. So passive investors do engage with the companies. So it's albeit at one stage removed from us, but it is still engagement.
Can I suggest Gillian answers this question?
Gillian, would you like to come forward with an answer to that one?
Thank you. I will just make 2 points. So on passive investing, it is possible to engage as a passive investor. Obviously, you don't have the final step in the escalation pathway available to you, which is to divest on a case-by-case basis. The second point is that you don't necessarily remove all decisions from committee, because I think Amanda made that point that you would still be charging your fund officers with implementing the investment strategy, with the designing mandates with the help of the advisors. Part of that mandates is benchmark selection, and you would likely need to consider a range of different benchmarks to meet with your existing statement of investment principles, or else review what it is that you have set as your investment principles and responsible investment principles. So it's quite a big task, as Amanda I think was highlighting there.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair.
Thanks, convener. Probably just one question that I'd like a bit more clarity on in terms of ESG, environmental, social and governance. 4.3.4 describes its pensions committees may, however, take non-financial factors such as ESG risks into account in determining policies, provided these have no material impact on fund performance. Obviously, that speaks to fiduciary duty, but I would like a bit more clarity on how we would determine environmental and social. I think I'm pretty clear on governance, but environmental and social risks where that's concerned. I wonder if could be a bit more clarity on that, please.
Amanda's suggesting that I ask you, Gillian. Would you like to come in on that one?
Yes, happy to come in on that. So the most obvious environmental risk is climate, and where you have carbon taxes, there's a clear financial materiality to that, but obviously there's much broader aspects there where you can assess financial risk from that, either on the individual company or across the economy. But that's not the only E. There are nature risks across supply chain. There's pollution risks. From the social side, there's a whole range of aspects there, as in from workers' rights. Sometimes it's board composition, how decisions are being made. All of this can fall under social. It also goes to working practices, the risk of fines from poor working practices and industrial accidents, etc. That all falls under social. So our view is that companies that manage their businesses well and appropriately and think about the risks and try and mitigate them, as in better managed, should be better placed to perform within their industries or within their sector. And that's what we mean by making these items being thought about by boards and sometimes the materiality of them can be a question. How material is this issue or not? And sometimes we just have to focus on one or two with a company.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, convener. I don't have any further questions, but probably a few comments to make. I don't know if that would be appropriate to do that now or wait till after all the questions have been asked and answered.
I think it might be best to wait until all the questions have been asked and answered.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Spears.
Just in risks, subjection to tariffs from foreign countries affecting businesses who we've invested in. Will we be taking these risks into account on who we invest our pension fund with?
Well, the fund managers will be reviewing their stocks, I would expect, and would be making decisions to deselect or select stocks as required on the basis of what's happening with in response to the tariffs. But it is a very volatile position right now, and I think we'll see we're seeing some big market shifts. So I think it's going to take quite a while for that volatility to settle down. And I suppose the important thing for ourselves as a fund is that we really are taking that long-term 20-year sort of view because of the nature of the fund. So I'm sure that fund managers will be doing plenty of analysis and sort of data mining just now to look at whether they're going to deselect certain stocks.
We're no longer a member of the European Union, but we still have a Commonwealth. We're still part of the Commonwealth. So we'll wait for a delegation coming forward to see if we're going to support our investments to help our Commonwealth partners.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to check my understanding of passive investment. As through what I've just heard here just now, it sounds to me that if we did switch massively to passive investment, it would enable both the committee and the board to actually say to people, well, we don't pick anything, so therefore we're clean when it comes to ESG issues. However, I think that's the wrong thing to do, because I think the way we're set up just now with a bit more clarity going forward enables us to engage in ESG issues with companies, how they perform, what the boards are doing, what decisions are being made. And I think passive investment would limit our ability to do that. I just want to make sure I've kind of interpreted that correctly. Does that sound right?
Sounds right to me, but I'm no expert. Amanda's suggesting Gillian might be best to answer that one.
I would just say that was very well put. That was a good description of the while passive can be very cheap, it means that you end up having very little, well, you have no control over what you buy within the index, because you buy everything in the index. The only thing you control is which index you benchmark against.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right, one last question, and then I'll come to my question as well, and then we'll move on, I think, to some discussion about the report.
I'll just push back on that, because you have a choice of indices. There are ESG reactive indices. As I said before, the passive fund managers do engage and are on record as being the most engaged with investments.
Sorry, that was more of an opinion than a question, I think, which I was about to move on to. But I have one more question before we go on to the discussions. And that is, in terms of our statement of responsible investment principles, are there any areas of investment that we specifically say we would not get involved in?
My understanding at this point is we don't have any blanket statements within our statement of responsible investment principles, and we've got the sort of 6 principles for responsible investment principles set out on page 6 of the supplementary agenda. But I think what the approach that the fund has taken as a whole is to try and avoid blanket policies.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll call an end to the questions at that point, but I know that a number of members of the committee have some views they want to express. I don't want to spend the rest of the day on this one item, but I do think that given the interest that there is in this particular item, it's worth allowing a limited amount of debate on it. Councillor Sinclair, you already indicated a wish to come forward with some comment. Councillor Sinclair, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. My internet seems to be playing up on me at the moment, so I apologise for that. I think that there's more information needed on this. This is where I'm coming down on at the moment. I think that any decision of the committee relies on clear and abundant information, and this just seems to be. This isn't a binary choice here. There's a lot of grey area here that we have to operate in. I think the answer about some of the ESG stuff, that there seems to be a bit of a difference between what we would consider a risk of an investment in a particular organisation on wider society, and a risk on what the companies make, or the company or the organisation's makeup is. And I think that's where there's probably a lot of crossover there that we don't necessarily see, because I think the definitions of environmental and social governance is pretty clear, but environmental and social seems to be more in line with governance than it does with environmental. And I think that there's probably a bit more clarity I probably need there for my benefit, and I think it would probably benefit the whole committee. The other thing is, though, I wouldn't want, in terms of, because there's been a couple of comments about passive and the responsibilities from that. I don't know enough about that personally to make any kind of comment, but I wouldn't want the committee to absolve itself of all responsibility there, and I think I'd prefer the committee to take a more active approach than I would taking a passive approach. But that's on the limited knowledge and understanding I have of that right now. But yeah, I think more clarity on what our options are when it comes to balancing this fiduciary dilemma, if I can phrase it in that way. You know, on one hand, where we have a duty to our members to protect their interests and protect the fund, but we also have a responsibility to ensure that our investments have a positive impact on society. And I think that's where there's not enough clarity there for me. And I think that the recommendations in the report to get more advice on this, or more specialist advice on this, I think is probably the right thing to do at this moment, because it allows us then to, as a committee, to take a more rounded and informed decision on something like this, rather than look at sort of a reaction that may impact negatively on our members. And that's what we're here to do. I take on board all of the points that were made within Niamh's deputation. I think as a society, we look upon some of the actions in the world right now as utterly reprehensible, but we're not here to solve that crisis. We're here to do our part to our members, but at the same time balancing our impact on society in the wider world. So I think that's where I'm sitting at the moment. I agree that we should get more information and more advice on this before we take any steps on this, and I'd like to. I think that's where I sit at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Sinclair. Andy?
Thank you. I think that word balance was the one that I was thinking of, because there's some very clear statements of our responsibilities in here, but there's clearly some grey areas as well, and you can quickly get into some subjective areas like ethical, unethical, and different people's views on that. I think the deputation made some important points. It obviously specifically referenced Israel Gaza, but obviously in the discussion other conflicts came up. So you know that there's a real difficulty here. So for me, having that sort of principle-backed approach to investment, I think is important. I probably at this stage would favour the more engagement approach than passive from what I'm hearing. But I think as far as the way forward, I think I'd support the recommendations in the paper. But I do wonder, you know, there's been a lot of comments of could it do this, could it do that? I wonder if we need to see the scope of what the report will include and come back with before we press go on the report, just so we're clear on what it's going to tell us and what it's not going to tell us, just so we've got managing expectations of what this report is going to help us with for decisions in another meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any? I mean, it does seem to me that it's fairly clear that committee members are keen to look at options for greater control over our responsible investments or guidance for our the people who are in charge of our investments. But we are also very, very clear about our fiduciary duties as well. So I think that's the clear message that we would be giving to our officers in terms of coming forward with a report, that we are absolutely crystal clear that there is a need, but we don't have enough information as yet to make any such decision, which, to be fair, we're not in this report being asked to make such a decision. Can I finish the debate at that point and just move that we, sorry.
Apologies to interrupt. I'm just wondering about the point that that Mr. Whitty's made about seeing the scope of the report, because obviously
somebody outside
is protesting.
Sorry, for the sake of everyone there is a noise coming from outside, which is from protesters, and it's causing some difficulty for hearing in here. So if everyone who's speaking could try to speak very clearly.
Thank you. I suppose it was just to get committees and boards' view about the scope coming back here, because obviously what that means is that the next meeting is in June. So it would be a couple of months before we bring the scope back, and then before we could then go out to procurement. So I just want to get committee and boards' view on whether they want to wait and see the scope in June before we press ahead, or whether we can start the procurement process just now. Thank you.
Andy?
Thank you. Would it be possible to do the scope remotely so that that could be seen and agreed before the next meeting? Would that maybe help with the timescales? I'm not sure how that process is around that work. Thanks.
If it's a formal committee decision, if Amanda's asking for the committee to agree the scope, then we have to have a meeting to do that. We do it remotely, but we still have to have a meeting with reports and agendas. If it's something that the officers can do themselves, just looking for authority today to go and do that, just to develop the scope, take it forward, then that wouldn't need another meeting.
Does anyone have other views? I mean, it does seem to me that we are keen that there is progress on this matter, and that we don't delay it by saying we'll have another report for another meeting to decide whether we have another meeting. Sorry, is that Councillor Sinclair?
Yeah, sorry,
Nope.
I've popped my camera off just to
Okay.
stabilise my internet connection. Yeah, I think I agree with some of the points that that Andy's making there, but I think in the interest of expediency, I think there's been a lot of discussion here about scope. So I think I'm not sure if Amanda needs more clarity on what the scope of the report would be coming back. But I'd be content to allow officers to get on and bring the report back as soon as they can.
Unless Amanda wants to say that you feel as if you haven't got enough information at this stage, I think I would support that, and I do see nods coming from the screen rather than having any further delay. Does that answer your question adequately? I think we can trust our officers to take on board the issues that have been discussed here today and come back with an appropriate report. So with that in mind, do we agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. And thank you very much again to the deputation for giving us additional information on which to base our discussion and debate. So we will move on now to item 4. As I said earlier, those who are in the gallery are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if they wish to. But we will move on now to the item 4, pension fund, the external audit, annual audit plan. And I think that will be in your ballpark, Amanda.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just very briefly introduce, because our colleagues are here from Audit Scotland. So as committee and board know, Audit Scotland are our external auditors, having been appointed for a 5-year term starting in 22-23 financial year. They carry out a pension fund audit each year, supported by some work by internal audit, who annually review pension fund transactions as well to ensure our operational controls are working effectively. Pauline Gillen from Audit Scotland is here, and I'm sure she'll be happy to talk you through the audit plan and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Would you like to pick that up now?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So the paper in front of you this morning is our annual audit plan for the 24-25 audit. Similar format to previous years, so just a couple of things to draw to your attention. Paragraph 5 of the plan, we outline there a number of bullet points, which is the scope of the audit. Essentially an audit of the financial statements, the annual report and accounts, but also in line with the wider scope of public sector audit in Scotland, we also consider arrangements for for wider scope areas, and we report on those in our annual audit report at the conclusion of the audit. Just turning your attention to Exhibit 1 of the plan. Here we outline the various levels of materiality that we operate when carrying out the audit of the financial statements. You'll see there we have the high level overall materiality level at £68 million. We also have the performance materiality level, which is essentially a trigger point that's set at £47 million. And essentially it means if we identify any errors or misstatements that exceed £47 million, then we take a step back and consider whether we need to carry out additional audit procedures to ensure that we don't breach the overall materiality level. We also have a reporting threshold of £1.5 million, and that's the level at which we would bring to this committee's attention any errors or misstatements that we uncover as part of our audit work. Exhibit 2 of the plan outlines the significant risks of material misstatement that we identified as part of our planning and risk assessment work at the start of the year. There are 2 risks in this table. The first one is the standard risk members will have seen in all previous audit plans, and it's essentially related to the inherent risk of fraud related to management's ability to override internal controls. And you'll see there we have a range of audit procedures that the team will carry out during the year to address that risk. We also, similarly to previous annual audit plans, we have a significant risk over the valuation of investment assets, specifically the level 2 and level 3 investments, and that's simply recognising the significant level of estimation and professional judgment involved in valuing some of those. And you'll see there we've got a range of audit procedures that we carry out, a lot of them related to relying on the work of the investment managers and their expertise in this area. Next section of the plan outlines the 4 wider scope areas covered by public sector audit in Scotland. You'll see there financial management, financial sustainability, vision, leadership and governance, and the use of resources to improve outcomes, which is essentially performance reporting. And we shall report on arrangements for all 4 of those areas in our annual audit report at the conclusion of this year's audit. We have not identified any significant wider scope or best value risks in those areas, so we will just report on the arrangements as they are. Finally, the last section of the report is the reporting arrangements, including the timetable for this year's audit. And you'll see there some of the key dates that we have agreed with management to enable us to sign off the audit by the end of September, which is the statutory deadline. You'll note there that we don't have confirmation yet of when the relevant committee dates will be in September, but we're working with management to confirm those, but it will be signed off by the end of September, as it was last year. So that was all I wanted to say on the plan, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I maybe just start off by looking at asking you to say a little more about Exhibit 1, where you have detailed the materiality at 68 million and performance materiality at 47 million. For members of the public, I think these are huge figures, and some of us might think that things were material at a much lower level than that. I wonder if you could explain that a little bit for us, please.
Yes, certainly. And yes, those figures do appear to be large, but it's set in the context of a monetary large set of accounts. And you'll see there for our overall materiality, we base it on the net assets in the accounts rather than expenditure, just considering the value of the assets in the accounts. The range that we set for materiality is based on a number of different things. So, for example, we consider the risk of the organisation, we consider the strength of the controls that are in place, and the insurances that we get specifically from investment managers. But we also consider any history of prior year errors, so how many misstatements there have been in previous years. And you'll see there the 70% of planning materiality, which is where we've set performance materiality at, recognises that there are minimum misstatements and errors in previous years' accounts. Therefore, we can set it at the higher range. But just to give members assurance that we do report any errors or misstatements that are over the 1.5 million, which is our reporting threshold. But in terms of the work we do and in terms of my opinion on the accounts at the year end, we work towards the slightly higher levels of materiality, but any misstatements will be brought to your attention if they exceed 1.5 million. So hopefully that provides a bit of assurance.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? If there are no other questions, then can we approve the recommendations? Agreed? Agreed. I should perhaps have just paused after that last item and given people a comfort break, because we have been going for over an hour now. So if we could just maybe take 5 minutes before the next item, if that's okay. Right. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you've all managed to have a cup of tea or whatever other comfort it was that you were needing at that point. So we are moving on now to the item 5, Pension Fund Governance Policy and Compliance Statement. I think this is you again, Amanda.
Yes, thank you, Convener. So the Local Government Pension Scheme Regulations 2018 require the fund to produce a governance compliance statement which sets out the fund's governance arrangements. And this report may be familiar to some of the committee and board because they would have received a similar report last March on this. The fund is expected to flag up any significant changes that we make to the governance framework as part of the statement. And examples of the types of changes are included in section 3.3 of the paper. And paragraph 3.4 of the paper confirms that there were no significant changes made since the board received the governance compliance statement in March 2024. The policy itself is included in Appendix 1, which is on page 38 of today's agenda, and the compliance statement starts on page 49 of the agenda. The compliance statement is broadly the same as the March 2024 statement and shows two areas of non-compliance. The first on page 50 relates to the secondary committee, but this is flagged as not compliant as cannot be complied with. And this is because the only other fund-related structure, which is the Pensions Board, has a statutory oversight role, so a member cannot sit on both the board and the committee. The second on page 51 highlights that the fund does not have an independent professional observer, and the rationale for that decision is shown in the arrangements in place columns, which is on the same page. And so in summary, the fund continues to demonstrate substantially full compliance with the regulations. And I'm happy to take any questions, and my colleague Catherine's also online. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Does anyone have any questions? Andy?
Hi, can I just check on 4.3, the admitted bodies? Does that need updating from myself being on? Because it says it's currently at Strathcarron Hospice. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I wonder if you might like to say a little more about the where there is no compliance in terms of the independent professional observers. I mean, I take the point in terms of the arrangements in place, but it does seem to me that we could still manage to have an independent observer, unless there any particular reason for not doing it.
I think we're one of a number of funds that doesn't have an independent professional observer. Part of the rationale for that, as we've said and as you've recognised, is the other arrangements that we have in place. That includes, for example, our joint investment forum, and within our joint investment forum we have specialist advisors who are independent of any of the funds, so they provide us with that advice. So I think for the size of our fund, we feel that the arrangements that we have in place are sufficient, and we're not looking to procure independent professional observers at this point. If members wanted some more information on that, though, we could bring that back to a future committee under general governance matters, just in terms of what would be involved in looking at a professional observer. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, any comments? No, I see no hands. In that event, I should just say that can we approve the governance policy and compliance statement? Agreed. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is general governance matters. And I suspect that's you again, Amanda.
Yeah. So again, Catherine is online. Catherine's a bit unwell today.
Could you put your microphone on, please?
Apologies, thank you, convener. So I will pick this up again. Catherine's online, potentially to answer any questions, but she's a little bit under the weather today, so I will pick this up for now. And just thank you to Catherine for pulling this piece of work together. So firstly, we're welcoming Nicola McCarter, who is a trade union appointed member representative to the Pensions Board, and this is the first meeting for Nicola, so we'd like to welcome her to the meeting. The report contains a number of updates, and I'll briefly mention some of those. We've got an update on the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. So as members are aware, there was 8 administering authorities, I think, who had an element of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service pension within it. Scottish Fire and Rescue Service decided to amalgamate their pensions, and they've consolidated all their membership into Strathclyde Pension Fund. And as part of that exercise, that was completed on the 31st of October. And as part of that, we had to use our actuary to calculate a share of the assets to be transferred to the pension fund and the liabilities transferred as well. And the asset share that transferred as a result of the consolidation exercise is set out in paragraph 3.4, which was just over £16.2 million. There is, in section 4 of the report, there's reference to the inheritance tax on pensions liabilities, and the consultation, the joint consultation response is appended to the report, and it is quite a lengthy and detailed document. I think it's fair to say proposals in the consultation on including pension liabilities and inheritance tax was quite an unpopular approach with pension schemes generally, and a joint response was submitted for the 11 local government pension funds in Scotland and the Northern Ireland Local Government Pension Fund, which covers around 840,000 members. And that response set out concerns around the approach that was being set out. So, as I say, that consultation is appended to the report in Appendix 1. It's quite technical and detailed, but essentially there was some discomfort with the proposed changes to the inheritance tax on pensions liabilities. The Good Governance Seminar is set out in Section 5. That took place on the 26th of February. That was for members of Scottish pension boards who gathered to discuss various issues affecting board management and looked at potential proposals to improve the governance of the local government pension scheme in Scotland. And I think the board had some thoughts on maybe getting together to discuss what some of those good practice and improvements could look like for Falkirk. So it was a really interesting seminar, and I think it was a helpful event that both Catherine and I attended, and Mr. Cleary attended as well. Section 6 references the Sustainable Future for Scottish Local Government Pension Schemes Conference. That's taking place next week. It's bringing together the 11 Scottish local government pension funds, and the themes that will be discussed are set out in section 6.2 of the paper. And it is looking at working collaboratively and sustainably, but also looking at areas like climate change and investment in Scottish infrastructure. So those are the kind of key areas that the conference next week will be picking up. And if there's anything significant or anything of note coming out of that conference, we'll pick up in the next General Governance Matters paper as well. In section 7, we've just referenced the BBC Scam Safe Week, which ran at the end of 2024, and it did, there was an EastEnders storyline which looked at how easy it is to fall prey to pension scams and how difficult that can be for the victim. And it may be worth highlighting that that storyline was based on a real event, and so we're hoping that that will help raise awareness of scams in this area and also prompt people to take action, report to the police, etc., etc. And there's also further information about pensions fraud webinar which is also getting picked up next week. The Pensions Funds Dashboard programme is continuing and work's continuing in Falkirk. We have, our staging date is the 30th of September 2024, and preliminary work was undertaken in January, and phase 1 of our connection journey is due to complete by the end of this month. So Catherine and the team have been working really hard to progress that significant piece of work. At this point, we remain on target to make our connection date, and we just have to work with our additional voluntary contribution providers to ensure the fund and those providers connect at the same time, and that work is in hand. And we've also had to complete a data protection impact assessment, which the council has to complete any time personal data, there's systems changes or policy changes that impact on personal data. And so we've completed that to ensure the safety of our members' data. And the final point I would make is around the ministerial request about Scottish investments. We received a request about the fund's Scottish investments, and we responded that 2.6% of the fund's total assets were invested in real assets in Scotland. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Does anyone have any questions for Amanda or for Catherine? And I should have said welcome to Nicola to the committee. I hope you're finding it exciting. And Catherine, if you're not well, it's above and beyond the call of duty that you're here, but thank you. Any questions? Rob?
The point about the IHT implications, I thought the report on that was very detailed and quite worrying. I would just like to ask Amanda, were there many issues that are raised? I mean, language like grave concerns suggests there's a major problem. What are your 3 biggest worries?
Yeah, so the 3, sorry, I didn't come in person because I don't want to pass this on. The 3 main concerns are basically, 1, making funds liable for the inheritance tax currently. That lies with the personal representative. We firmly believe that that should remain the case. We don't see that the current system whereby pension funds can make payments towards IHT, because it does happen in the NHS, because their death benefit structure is different and their death benefits do fall within inheritance tax. So there is a structure in place. Funds are not made liable. We believe that that should continue, and it shouldn't fall to funds to be responsible or made liable for the inheritance tax, because once we've paid the death grant out, we have no money left to follow up and make any further payments, and that's one of the proposals, is funds would be liable for that. Other issues are that there doesn't seem to be an equivalent of, there's no exemption limit. So our biggest concern, particularly in Scotland, is the impact that that would have on dragging people in from the small estates route into the large estates route when settling death benefits. We have roughly three times pay as our death in service benefits. A person on £12,000 per annum would have a £36,000 death grant. If they had even 10 pence in savings elsewhere, they would be dragged into the large estates regime. We think that's disproportionate. We think that that would cause a lot of hardship, because the large estates route is a lot more complex than the small estates route. We also think it's kind of taking a sledgehammer to crack a peanut. When on the consultation response at the very, I think it's the second last page, I'm sorry, I can't tell you which page on the report it is, there's a graph and it shows you the volume of death grants that were paid across the 12 funds in a 12-month period. The majority are small. There are very few that are large. We don't, it's, the age range was also from 19 years old to 85. That 19-year-old, if they had been under the new regime, their estate would have had to go through the large estate, causing more distress to family and the bereaved. And that's really the key. We were very concerned about the impact this would have on the survivors, the bereaved, and is it absolutely strictly necessary, given that they're not expecting many, benefits to actually have to be captured and pay inheritance tax? Is there not a better way, basically, was the thrust of what we had.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Adequate? Yes. Thank you very much. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. Page 60, number 10, in the ministerial request about Scottish investments. You gave a figure there, did you say 2.5% of our investments? Is that in Scotland or just in Scottish equities?
There was 2.6% of the fund's total assets were invested in real assets in Scotland, so that's like infrastructure. So that would be things like wind farms and things.
So I'm really trying to drill down to find out why there was a ministerial request. Are they trying to encourage pension funds to invest in Scotland?
I think it relates to the statements that have been made in the UK government about trying to encourage more local investment and trying to potentially use pension funds for more UK infrastructure. So I think this, we've said in paragraph 10.1 that sort of on the back of the UK government review, Scottish Government have requested information from local Scottish pension funds.
Well, I'm a great believer in shop local, so invest local is probably right up our street.
I think that might kind of lead into your the conference. There will be issues about investing in local infrastructure there. Like Councillor Spears, I think many of us would like to see investment in local infrastructure. So I'll be very interested to hear a report back from the conference. Any other questions? No other questions. Can we agree the recommendations of the report, which are just to note the contents? Thank you. We move on to agenda item 7, which is investment review. Who's going to lead on that? Is that you again, Amanda? That would be Albert. Albert, could you lead on this, please?
Okay. Thanks very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So this is our regular quarterly review of investments. Those of you who are familiar with the report will be, you'll know it's the regular format. Starting on section 3 on page 81, a few comments on the market conditions over Q4 at the end of last year. It seems a long time ago now, but the main event for that quarter was arguably the US election in terms of the Republican red sweep with Donald Trump coming back for a second term. In terms of market movements and developments there, probably the main thing to note was central banks across the US, Europe and the UK cutting interest rates that had been near recent highs. In terms of market moves, for the 3 months to end of December 2024, global equities performed very strongly, so gaining 6% in sterling terms. The bulk of that was driven by strength in the US dollar's appreciation. In terms of the market sectors that performed well, these included consumer discretionary, communication services and IT, particularly bolstered by gains from the so-called Magnificent Seven large tech companies, including Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Alphabet and Amazon. In terms of the what's happened since the end of the quarter, if we look at what markets have done, equity markets in particular, have been highly volatile. So as of close yesterday, equity markets were down 3%. So we've seen a bit of a sell-off, particularly in growth sectors, as some of the tech stocks that had performed particularly strongly in Q4 last year have come off. So we have seen a heightened level of volatility, particularly in the equity market. Moving on to section 4, table 1 on page 82 shows you the fund's core investment strategy. So this is the results of the triennial actuarial valuation and investment strategy review, which was completed in March 2024 last year. So the strategy for the fund is set at 5 policy groups. Each of those policy groups represents different types of assets, which have broadly similar risk and return characteristics. So equities is the largest policy group target of 55%, followed by real assets, which includes infrastructure and property at 20%, followed by credit at 8%, sovereigns at 15%, and then cash at 2%. In the table below at section 4.3, that shows you the evolution of the fund's policy group allocations on a quarterly basis over 12 months to end December 2024. So you can see how those policy group allocations have changed over the period. Probably the main thing to note would be the progressive reduction in the equity weight. So from 58% at end December 2023 to just shy of 55% at end December 2024. That's broadly been due to the change in investment strategy that was agreed at March 2024. So a reduction in equity assets to get closer to target. And that has been offset by a slight increase in the allocation to sovereign bonds. So those have increased from 10% to 15% as at end December 2024. At the very right of the table, you can see the relative position of the actual allocation relative to strategy. So the most overweight position is really to cash. So just slightly under 2% overweight. And the greatest underweight is due to credit. So a weight of 6% against the target of 8%. That is a deliberate position adopted in terms of recommendations from the Joint Investment Forum. Credit spreads still remain near their lows, which means that credit is typically quite expensive relative to the level of return you might expect from the asset class. So that underweight to credit has been maintained for a long time. Table 3 on page 83 just shows a slightly more up-to-date position of the fund's position at both mandate level and policy group level, again showing that the policy group allocations relative to target on the right-hand side of that table are broadly similar to where they were as at end December 2024. So still an underweight to credit and a modest overweight to cash. The other slight difference is a slight overweight to equities. It's not much, so 55.5% relative to the target of 55%. So broadly speaking, the fund is relatively close to its target allocations with a slight overweight to credit, slight underweight to credit and an overweight to cash. In section 5, we reference the fund's returns over the quarter and longer term. So 5.3 notes that the fund returned minus 0.3% over Q4, again against a benchmark return of 2.2%. That was over the quarter, and we note that quarterly returns can be volatile given different market dynamics and different investment styles performing at any particular point in time. In 5.4, we reference the longer term returns. So the fund has returned 7.5% per annum since September 2001, which is ahead of its benchmark return over that period. So the long-term return for the fund has been strong, ahead of benchmark. Over 5 years, the fund has risen 6.3% per annum compared with the benchmark return of 3.9%. And over the 5-year period, we'd note that the fund has benefited from its exposure to equities and infrastructure, while UK government bonds have generated negative returns. Some brief comments on the funding position, which was last formally undertaken by Hymans Robertson at end March 2023, which showed a funding position of 137%. Since then, the fund's assets have increased in value, and so we think the funding position is likely to have improved since then, as the assets are higher in value than they were, and there's also been an increase in interest rates, which we estimate will have reduced the value of liabilities. So that was all I was going to note in terms of the report. I'm happy to stop there and take any questions or any comments from around the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Rob?
Yeah, just a very quick question. Are these returns you're quoting net or gross of fees?
So the returns shown there are reported by Northern Trust, and currently they are gross of fees. There is a separate exercise that Falkirk carry out, as well as Lothian and Fife. So that we also do at Lothian that looks at the net of fees returns, but that is carried out separately by a separate provider called CEM that also benchmarks the fees and the costs we pay on an annual basis. So we do that on an annual basis. But short answer, these are gross returns reported by NT.
I think it would help us if we could see the net returns in these performance tables.
Yeah, fair point. That is something that the officers and ourselves would need to work with NT to get those returns adjusted. Yeah.
I'll leave that with you to look into whether that's easily done or not. Can I just ask that going back to section 3, you mentioned at the end of section 3 about the Trump administration. You said it seems like a long time ago since the election. Some of us are still raw. But could you say a little more about what can be done to deal with the volatility that's being created by the situation there?
Yeah, I think that's something that's on everybody's minds, particularly in the immediate aftermath of his re-election. In terms of it from an investment strategy perspective, you wouldn't necessarily make any changes in the short term. So from a strategic perspective, it's a bit difficult to conclude that what we're thinking about now will necessarily hold in the next 12 months, in the next 2 years, over the next 3 years, over the next 4 years. So everything that we hear in terms of developments that are currently happening and prospective developments that may or may not be happening coming from the administration, it's very difficult to decide or make a change from a strategic perspective based on what you're thinking. So in some ways, there isn't a lot you can do about the volatility from a strategic perspective. I think what funds, in an ideal world, a fund will already have an existing strategy that is relatively robust to this type of volatility. So by that I mean, if you have if you have different styles of mandates, in theory, that collection of different mandates will balance out the potential volatility you might see in any individual single mandate. So from my perspective, I would think there's not anything you can really do. What you might look to do is you might look at your current balance of investments and think about, okay, is that the right mix for us? But again, you sort of want to think about that over the long term, as in whether that's something that will hold over 3, 5, 10 years, rather than for it to be a knee-jerk reaction to say, okay, Trump's doing this, or he says he's doing this, or this is what the administration is thinking about now, and then making that sudden change only to then potentially have to reverse it in 6 months' time if the position changes again. So everything that we see happening now, it's very difficult to necessarily conclude that is going to be the exact same position, in 2, 3 years' time. So short answer, it's very difficult. I think what it does do is it prompts review and thinking about from a strategic level whether you've got the right mix.
Thank you very much for that full answer. Rob?
Albert, thanks for that. Looking at Appendix 1 on page 86, you talk about the excess return, but you don't talk about the excess risk. I think it would help us if we could see the information ratios, maybe, I'm not sure if it's possible for the whole fund, but certainly for the equity funds, just to quantify how much extra risk the fund is taking to get those additional returns. Would that be possible?
I think it would be. We'd need to speak to NT. I think one of the things that we do look at fund level is the Sharpe ratio at overall fund level. So that effectively normalizes out all the individual differences between the individual mandates and looks at what the fund has achieved holistically in terms of its overall allocation. So that is something that's this independent benchmarking provider also provides. So they not only do they benchmark costs, but they also look at the fund's return as well as its actual realized level of risk over a period of time. And so that is something that I think, we could obviously have a conversation with the officers about when to include that and in which report. But that isn't something that we get from NT, although they do, because NT don't compare Falkirk's return to other returns. It's just an individual fund report. But we do have that information from another provider that we can provide.
What I'm talking about is the excess return over the index. So basically, how much extra return the active funds get relative to a passive index, which is what the information ratio gives you. Sharpe ratios are getting interest rates, but what we're looking at here is the additional return over a Plonk passive fund.
Yeah, so I think you can. So we do have. So that is included in. That's included for the individual mandates in terms of in Appendix 1. So the returns relative to their respective benchmarks. So those individual returns are there.
Yeah, but not the risk.
Yeah, sure. So we have the risk at overall fund level, because when we're thinking about the risk for the individual mandates, those all form part of a collective and are put together as a collective for the overall fund. So I suppose from a committee level, what's important is the level of risk that the fund is taking in aggregate, and how that measures to the relative return that you're getting for the level of risk that you're taking. So for example, we can see over 10 years in that table, the fund has returned 7.6% relative to its benchmark of 6%. So that's ahead of benchmark. But as you say, that doesn't capture the risk. So some of the numbers that we've seen from CEM provide that long-term level of return versus the long-term level of risk. And they also provide that number across the other LGPS funds within their survey. So you can see what level of Sharpe ratio, what level of risk have you taken relative to what other LGPS funds have taken, and whether that is, where does that sit within the mix of, other funds and the level of risk that they've taken. So that is certainly something we can obtain from CEM.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Spears.
Hi, Albert. Would our risk increase if we didn't invest in large government-funded schemes?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Councillor? Sorry, apologies.
Would the council's risk increase if we didn't invest in government schemes that are receiving large investments?
Sorry, would the council's risk increase if we didn't invest in large government? Which large government schemes are you referring to?
I'm thinking of the recent new defence budget.
So I think, so if you're referring to the deputation and, if your question is, would Falkirk Pension Fund's risk increase if it didn't invest in, for example, defence companies that might benefit from the increased defence funding that might be coming? It's difficult to say whether risk would increase or decrease. I mean, what you would find is that if you chose not to include a particular sector, so I'm going to try and talk in generalities rather than specifics. So if you chose not to invest in a particular sector, you would preclude yourself from exposure both to the upside and the downside of that particular sector. And because the upside and the downside of that sector is idiosyncratic, so it's typically independent of the risk factors of the other things that you're invested in some sense, you are therefore reducing your potential diversification benefit. Okay, so that is just a general comment that can be applied to any individual sector, right? So if you're invested in 20 sectors, you effectively get the risk of all those individual 20 sectors. If you take out one of those sectors and now you're invested in 19, then you miss the diversification benefit. So that could be the upside or the downside of that particular sector that you've taken out. Okay, so that can be applied to how you think about any sector that you might want to include or not include. So by removing a particular sector from a particular investment menu, to some extent, you are reducing the potential diversification benefit. But the other thing I would say is that you don't know ahead of time whether that's going to be good or bad for you, right? So you might say, okay, well, actually, we won't invest in this particular sector. So if that sector then does tremendously well relative to everything else, well, then you've missed out on that. Conversely, if it does particularly badly, then you also miss out on that as well. But ahead of time, you don't know what it's going to do. So, you know, from an investment perspective, ideally you want multiple sources of diversification to offset the risks from all the other different sectors that will have their own idiosyncratic risks associated with them. So that's a very general, very long-winded way of saying, if you exclude something to some degree, you're reducing your diversification benefit.
Thank you. I think you've just explained the vagaries of the market.
A very full explanation. I don't think we want to return to the previous item on the agenda, and we will have a discussion offline about investing in a crystal ball for you. Any other questions?
But just to follow up on my earlier questions. So on Appendix 1, performance returns, that 7.5% since inception, that's a gross return, is it?
Yeah.
So can you make a sort of stab at what the net return would be, has been? Because the excess return of 0.9%, I suspect, is probably eaten up by fees. You look at the Legal and General passive, 11.5, and actually outperformed its benchmark by 0.1%. And obviously a passive fund is pretty much net.
Yeah, so, you know, if I were to take a stab at that, the since inception return might be closer to 7. If you look across the LGPS in terms of what the fee load is, it's probably in the region of 50 to 70 basis points on average. And I think numbers that I've seen from the CEM report for Falkirk suggest that number's probably around 0.5 to 0.6. Now, whether it's been that for the duration since September 2001, I can't really comment because we don't have those numbers, but I'd say the number might be a bit closer to 7. Maybe it's a bit closer to 7. That would be a guess, but an estimate. But we would need to have a conversation with the fund's performance provider, so that's NT, to see whether there's are they able to get a net of fees return for you. Yeah, but that would be my estimate.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I think we will go back to the recommendations and note the investment market developments, the fund's strategic allocation performance and investment monitoring activity. Can we agree the recommendations of the report? Thank you. We'll move on then to agenda item number 8. And I'm not sure who's doing this one. Is it you again, Amanda? Yes.
Thank you, convener. So this is the standard engagement and voting activity paper that comes to the joint meeting of the committee and board every quarter. And as members know, we use engagement services provided by Hermes EOS. We've appointed them for a period of 4 years, and they attended the training session that we had in January and answered a large number of questions. I'm hoping that everyone found it really helpful and interesting, a really helpful and interesting session. So the report is fairly standard. It follows a pretty standard format. We get 3 public reports from Hermes EOS each year. We get a voting report, sorry, each quarter. We get a voting report, an engagement report, and a public engagement report. And that public engagement report comments on the engagements that Hermes EOS have had with a variety of companies and organisations. So those reports are all filed on SharePoint, but the committee and the board are asked to treat these as confidential. Hermes EOS are clear that that confidentiality is very important in terms of their engagement with those companies. There are some statistics, shown in section 6 of the paper, section 5 and section 6, in terms of both fund engagement activity and voting. So quarter 3 shows that Hermes engaged with 62 companies on a range of 214 ESG issues and objectives. And in quarter 4, Hermes engaged with 69 companies on a range of 233 ESG issues and objectives. And obviously at the training we had in January, there was a bit more explanation about what those kind of issues and objectives could be, and how long or short those issues may be. The voting, as I say, is set out in section 6. There was 27 voting at 27 meetings where they were opposing one or more resolutions. Sorry, that was at 12 meetings. Voting with management exception at 1 meeting, and supporting management on all resolutions in the remaining 14 meetings. That was in quarter 3. Quarter 4, it was opposing one or more resolutions at 12 meetings, voting with management by exception at 2 meetings, abstaining at no meetings, and supporting management on all resolutions at the remaining 10 meetings. And as I say, the further detail about the engagement activity is included in SharePoint. And if there's any further questions, happy to take them here or happy to take them offline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And yes, it was a very informative session we had. Thank you for those who organised it and those who participated in it. You know how much I like a good briefing. So, does anyone have any questions? Rob?
Something I forgot to ask at the briefing, actually. How much do we pay Hermes for this service?
I don't have that figure to hand, but I will find out and come back to you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I think it's perhaps a sign of how good the briefing was that we don't have to ask too many questions. So we will note the contents of the report and the reports provided by Hermes. That agreed? Thank you. We'll move on now to item 10, which is the Pension Fund Business Plan. And I see it was Catherine who wrote this, but is Catherine going to present it or yourself, Amanda?
I'm happy to come in and Catherine can answer some questions if required. So I think first of all we would just say that this is a new report, and so to some extent we're looking for some feedback from members and committee on what they would like to see in the report and what they would like to see in the business plan. So the point of the plan is to act as a tool for the committee and the board to understand what activities the pension section is going to be undertaking during the year, and that includes some of the improvement and development works that are planned, as well as things like the structure and the training that's planned for the committee and the board to make sure that we're meeting everyone's needs. In terms of that training and knowledge piece of work, the first knowledge assessment was completed by around 50% of the existing committee and board. So we'd like to thank the members that took time to complete the assessment and who shared their experience in completing the questions. And so that will help us to shape future assessments going forward. Overall, the knowledge levels displayed were good. The average score was around about 74%. And so those results were not out of step with what we see in some of the kind of national assessment work that is run by areas like Hymans Robertson. So we're not out of step with that national picture. One of the things that we've covered in the report is a proposal to hold bite-sized training. We're calling it for the committee and board. So half an hour before the committee and board starts, before the joint meeting, having a sort of half-hour training session. And so for June, we were going to look at the role and the expectations of the committee and board in the review of the fund's annual reports and accounts, for example. So it's just to help support members in terms of the decisions that they're going to be asked to be making in subsequent meetings. So the business plan, as I say, it's a sort of new report. We're really just sort of starting to explore how we've produced this, and we've set out a section on the fund's core activities, which is in section 5.2 of the paper, and then there's some planned improvements set out in section 5.3. And when I go on to talk about the budget in private session, we'll be recognising that we are making provision for a lot of that improvement activity within the budget that's being proposed. And finally, I would just say thank you to Justina, who's confirmed that we pay Hermes EOS £90,000 per annum.
Efficient as always. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the report? Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just really on the knowledge assessment, it's good to see that 74% was achieved, but there's quite a large number of people didn't complete the assessment. 3 out of 8 board members and over 50% of the committee members. Is there anything being done to address that, and why was that?
Are you able to answer that one?
In terms of why that was the case, I don't know exactly why that was the case, and obviously we would encourage all the committee and board members to complete the assessment, or if they're having issues with the assessment, to flag those up to us so we can try and facilitate it. I suppose we do have a training policy which has been approved by committee. There is expectations around the level of training that committee members and board members are expected to undertake. And so we just need to make sure that we are implementing that training policy and that we are reporting back on if we felt there was any particular issues with that training policy, we would bring that back to committee for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I think, as I'm sure Councillor Flynn's aware, it's not in Amanda's control to force board committee members to attend training, but we would definitely encourage it because it is a very important thing that we all actually understand. I'm always very appreciative of the training that's on offer, and the I'm seldom absent from any course that's available. Any other questions or comments? In that case, I would just say I think This is useful, and I think it is important that we have a kind of overview of the training that's available. How do people feel about the bite-size sessions at the start of the committee and board meetings? That's, I suppose, the one that will impact very clearly. It seems to me to be a reasonable way to go about it, but I'm open to comments. Andy?
Yeah, just building on, just agree with you that the training previously in January was very good. Just want to put that on record. I thought that was great. So, yeah, I mean, you know, given we're all busy people, doing something just before a meeting when we're gathering anyway would seem a sensible approach to it. So I think that, and it also means it can be responsive to what the training needs are at that point, if it's done before, you know, regularly before each meeting. So I think that's a sensible idea.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, Councillor Spears said here there, but he didn't put his mic on. So I'll take that as a general agreement. Tony, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's just a thought. Maybe we get this training added as a standing item on, or the first item on the agenda. So it's actually formally part of the meeting rather than tagged on before or tagged on the end. Just a thought.
I'll leave that to our governance officers and other officers to sort out exactly how that is brought forward to us. But yes, take your point. I think it is very important that people making these decisions are clear about it. Brian, do you want to maybe add to that?
I'm just wondering whether I do. If we have it as part of the session and it's a live stream, publicly accessible part of the meeting, so the public will view you being trained and all your questions. So it's probably better to have it earlier. One thing as well, though, if we set the time for 10 o'clock for the committee meetings, then the training session has to finish for 10 o'clock. So there will be a bit of tight time management round about that. But I think it'd be better to be before and to be separate.
Agreed. I hadn't thought about the live streaming, so apologies for that.
Well, thank you for that, Brian. Thank you, Tony. Any other comments? If not, I think we have commented on the report, and we note the proposed plan. Agreed? Right, at that point, we are going to finish the live streaming because we're moving on to agenda item 12, which is the pension fund budget and is a private matter. So can we take a break to ensure that we get the live streaming turned off and move forward? 5 minutes, no more.